El Al, 40 years, young.
לטוס מזרחה ודרומה, פריז, יוהנסבורג ורומא, ואמסטרדם. לטוס אל על ולהודות על הנס של קצת הדרך בכל יום, וכמו ברכת שלום, ישלח להמריא, אל על יצילי מנגינה נהדרת אשר לא תחדל. לטוס אל על, לטוס אל על.
1948 was a year of optimism. Fred Astaire led the world in dance. Truman was president. Coca-Cola got new packaging, and 3 new states were born. India, whose spiritual leader Gandhi was assassinated that same year, Pakistan, and Israel. The Union Jack is lowered, a new flag raised. The British quit, and the Jewish population is under siege. This is a time for tough decisions and firm leadership. A state in siege needs air links with the outside, yet not all were happy with the decision to set up a national airline. The governor of the Bank of Israel, the late David Horowitz, who was one of the main opponents of the idea, said then that Israel needed an airline like a nudist needed a top hat. The pop hit of the year was Manana, but in Israel, tomorrow meant an end to the fighting that was still raging. The president of the state was in Switzerland. A warplane was refurbished as a civil airliner. Stewards recruited, and the president arrives home in a plane belonging to an airline which does not yet officially exist. We landed at 5 in the morning, the day before the Jewish New Year, at the Tel Nof Air Base. The whole interim government was there, as well as a guard of honor from the Palmach. Nobody knew quite how to handle it. So what did he do? He got off the plane and he was very moved. There were tears in his eyes, and instead of reviewing the troops, he shook every soldier by the hand, saying, thank you, and believe me, we were all of us weeping. 1949, Hollywood. Sinatra and Kelly are smiling, but not yet here. Here was war. And in the midst of it, El Al was founded, its name chosen by David Remes from the scriptures. The task was undertaken by Yoel Palgi, Aryeh Pincus, and Dr. Avraham Rivkin. We got a room fitted out on Rothschild Boulevard. We started in this one room, which seated Dr. Rivkin, myself, and everyone else who joined us. And as someone once said, Hadassah was doing everything. Later on, about 1,000 people were handling the various jobs, and we gradually became an airline. One day, our first plane arrived. It was a DC-4 Skymaster. We began selling tickets, and the first flight took off for Paris. It was Saturday night, July the 31st, 1949. I remember that our first flight had more than 25 passengers. Most other flights were fully booked. We had to have a 2-letter identification for El Al. EA was taken by Eastern Airlines, AE belonged to someone else. We didn't know what to do until we had the idea of using LY, which comes from the name of Lidder Airport. We had to solve all of these problems, partly from the little experience we had, part of the main training schemes, and everything from scratch. The same way the whole state began. The state was established exactly 50 years after Theodor Herzl first foresaw it. One of El Al's first missions was to bring the visionary's remains to the homeland. The Skymaster was renamed Herzl. The early 1950s, prosperity in the West and the Cold War. When Esther Williams emerged from the depths in Hollywood, the splashes reached as far as Esty and Rena in the pool in Give a Time. Just like in America. And, just like in America, radio, the start of an electronics industry before the birth of the transistor. A wooden box with Bakelite knobs and the trademarks Ben-Ari or Palace. And refrigerators. And the first phonograph after 2,000 years of exile. For tens of thousands, the exile ended when they descended from the plane and kissed the ground of the Holy Land. Often the planes flew over hostile territory and were repainted to hide their true identity. Paint became a major item in the budget. It was then, as a truly national airline, that El Al played a role unique in the history of civil aviation. Secret operations with legendary code names such as Alibaba or Magic Carpet flew in new immigrants from North Africa, Iraq and Yemen. They were very skinny. We ripped out all the seats and replaced them with wooden benches. There were no seat numbers, as there are today. We simply crammed in as many as could sit on a bench, and the thinner they were, the better it was. Shacks, prefabs and tents were still an integral part of the view. In the space of a few years, the nation's population doubled. Hundreds of thousands dwelt in immigrant transit camps. The nation was virtually bankrupt, and El Al was a humble venture owning 4 outdated Skymasters, 5 second-hand spare engines, and an antique toolbox. Every time a plane took off, all of us in the workshops and the offices, we'd be out on the tarmac. And when they gunned the engines and started taxiing to the runway, we'd be uttering a silent prayer. The Lord send us out in peace and bring us back in peace, because we knew what we were sending out. A wreck fixed up with loving care, but what was it after all? A wreck. Anyway, it would take off in peace and come back in peace, thanks be to God. And today, look what we've got.
Jumbo.
What's the difference between a landlubber waiter and a flight steward? The earth and the heavens. El Al's first steward was whisked out of the airport cafeteria and sent aloft. We didn't know what a flight steward was supposed to do. Nobody knew, certainly not us. There was no such profession in Israel. We got a few hints from Captain Andrews and then from our flight captain about fastening seatbelts, serving meals, giving everyone a cushion and then putting the tray on the cushion. But there's one thing I remember to this day. He told us that we had to behave so that people won't think they're passengers, but guests in our home. An airlift of more than 1,000 goats from Holland. El Al staff can't quite understand the reluctance of the herd to get airborne. El Al pioneered improvised methods of transporting air freight in its early days. This was its main source of income. Flights were scattered all over the world to destinations and cargoes unknown, ranging from rhesus monkeys taken on board in India to blinches flown from Tel Aviv to Frankfurt. This is El Al's first cargo plane, a 2-engine Curtiss Commando, Army surplus from World War II. This plane carried food parcels from Europe to Israel, and then it would export raincoats. The raincoats were the cradle in which Israel's textile industry was born. Singing in the rain. What could be more natural than to export raincoats from a sun-kissed country?